On behalf of Dallas College and the Sustainability team, welcome. Thank you for joining Sustainable Dallas College for our monthly Sustainable You webinar series. My name is Faye Davis, Assistant Director of Sustainability for Outreach and Engagement. Thank you to our speakers who have donated their time to contribute to this webinar series, and thank you to our sponsors. We hope you enjoy this presentation. The Bonton community and Daron Babcock founded Bonton Farms, one of the largest urban farms in the United States, nestled in a once-forgotten neighborhood in South Dallas. Moved by his personal beliefs, Daron Babcock couldn't sit idly by as he witnessed his brothers and sisters in South Dallas be ravaged by institutional inequities. Known for crime, violence, and extreme poverty, the community of Bonton needed an intervention at the macro level, something Daron knew was not only necessary but possible. Bonton Farms is so much more than a farm. It is the catalyst that is helping to level the playing field, creating systemic change necessary so the residents of Bonton and others from marginalized neighborhoods all over the country can achieve the American dream that was promised 200 years ago. Daron Babcock is here today to share his story and the story of Bonton.
Well, thank you, Faye, for the introduction. As she said, my name's Daron Babcock. I'm the CEO of Bonton Farms, and I'm excited today to be able to share a bit of our story with you. I'm going to do my best in a short period of time to take you over a journey of about 30 years, so bear with me as we get going. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas, a blue-collar town to a blue-collar family. I was raised to think that men's value were determined by their character and their work ethic. And so that worked for me. I went to University of Oklahoma on a wrestling scholarship. I'll never forget the first day of practice. The coaches told us that we were the #1 ranked team in the country. Our coaches told us that of all the people that were there were going to be X number of people that would wind up being champions, X number of people that would wind up being Big 8 champions. That ages me a little bit. It was a Big 8 conference back then. And there were going to be some of us that wound up thinking the girls were cuter and more important than the sport, and some of us that wouldn't go to class and we'd lose our scholarships. And really the outcome was determined by what we were willing to put into it, which resonated with me because that's what I've been told my whole life. They handed out these shirts that said Oklahoma Wrestling on the front, and on the back it said, "If it is to be, it's up to me." And it just resonated with who I am. And I was gifted enough academically and gifted enough athletically that when I applied myself, I was able to accomplish what I set out to accomplish. Fast forward, I had the same approach to my business life. I thought that I wanted to be the next Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or one of those folks that changed the world through business. I moved to the Pacific Northwest because that's where I wanted to live and started my first company. And it was there that some of the things that I had been misled to believe that I had bought into started to catch up with me. You know, life isn't easy for everybody, and my life was no different. I had been through things in my life that, you know, I had been raised just to suck it up and keep going. And in Oregon, came across something where my wife was diagnosed with cancer, and it's the first time that I had to come face to face with something that I was powerless over. And so this whole life belief system that I was capable of overcoming anything that I put my mind to was shattered. 2 years from the date of her diagnosis, she died, and and everything around me crumbled. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't have a North Star because my belief system was that I was capable of doing whatever I needed to do in my life. And all of those hardships I had experienced started to bubble to the surface, and I became very angry and bitter and isolated. And it really wound up breaking me, but that's to me the most beautiful part of the story, because a lot of times the things that try to break us, if we overcome them, they wind up shaping us. And so it certainly shaped me. And coming out the other side of that, life changes. You know, your perspectives change. Trying to make money and buy stuff and build my own kingdom had less of a flavor to me. But somehow, helping other people overcome the hardships that they face, like I had been able to do, became a driving force for me. But how do you do that? You know, where do you find that work to do? And I didn't know. You know, I worked to rebuild my life. And as kind of the American culture has it, it's hard to get off of that train. I wound up I didn't have the energy to run a company anymore. I didn't want to stay up at night worrying if we were going to make payroll for our staff that depended on us to be successful. I just wanted to go work and to try to raise my kids and to continue to grow as a person with all these new things that I had learned in my life. And so I did that. But if you're driven, as I am, it's hard to just do that. And so I began, those old habits started kind of creeping up of overachieving. Long story short, I wound up working for a private equity firm. I left on Sunday night and would come home on Friday night and kind of got caught up in this rat race again. But there was this voice inside of me that kept talking about what was dear to me now, what had been planted in my spirit about helping other people and continuing that journey that I was on. And I just didn't know where to do that. I started a thing in my company. I asked our CEO if he would allow me to, to start what I called Soul Shine sessions, which was just a voluntary thing for people within our company to come talk about life and to get fed. Instead of just being people that produce numbers all the time, how could we address our humanity and the things we dealt with and within the context of our company? And while that was life-giving to a point, it wasn't really as deep as what I was looking for. And one day I was having coffee on a Saturday morning with a friend of mine, and all of a sudden in the middle of our coffee, he looked at his watch and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I've got to go." And I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "Well, I have a friend of mine that does prison ministry, and it's a fascinating story. One of the guys that he got to meet with inside the prison system got out, and he's from this community in South Dallas called Bonton. And there's not a lot of encouraging things happening in communities like Bonton. And I think because my friend's a great encourager, there's all these people that started showing up. And it's just, I think, because he believes in them. And so I'm going down to help him out. If you're not busy, you should go with me." And I think out of intrigue, I don't know why I went that day. I had a lot to do and I had a plane to catch the next day. But I think out of intrigue, I went to Bonton. I'll never forget the surreal experience of, they told us that before we drove into the community, we had to stop at the floodgates and have people meet us there to escort us in because you couldn't go there on your own. That's a bit intimidating. I'll never forget parking my car and walking up to the door and hearing yelling on the other side. It wasn't yelling like excitement, it was yelling like anger. I'm in this foreign place, in a place I don't understand and I don't know. And the guy on the other side of the door was really frustrated, and he was up. You see, he had just been released from prison and he had a GPS monitor on. And what he was saying is the terms of my parole dictate that this monitor is supposed to come off in 90 days. But now my parole officer says it won't come off until I get a job. So here's what happens. I'm required to get 3 interviews a week. And when I confirm an interview, I have to call my parole officer and tell them. And then they call the potential employer and say, "Do you know federal inmate number so-and-so, his name is X, says he has an interview with you on this date and time, I need to confirm that." And when they confirm it, he then says, "Please know that if your interview goes long, police will be dispatched to your premise." And that all happens before they meet me. And I'm not trying to play race into this, but I'm this white guy from the suburbs sitting there going, there's no way that that can be. The next guy chimed in and said, I got released to a halfway house that I have to stay at. I'm required to stay at for a year. I have to pay $200 a month to stay at this halfway house. And so I'm having to sell dope, which is what sent me to prison, so that I don't violate my parole to go back from prison. And I'm sitting there this is foreign to me, saying this cannot be. In fact, if you know anything about the inner city, you know that we're fond of what we call hood names. If you're embraced in our community, you don't go by your real name. You go by a term of endearment that somebody comes up with you. And they're not really usually flattering, but it's an honor, it's a badge of honor to have one. And the first one that they gave me, I can't repeat on camera, but the second one that they gave me was, they called me the no way guy, because I'm from this different place, right? We're all one people, we're all one community, we're all one city, we're all one country. And yet I come from a different place, and the place I came from, this kind of thing was so foreign that I found myself every time my new friends were telling me their stories, I'm like, no way, like that can't be. It was such a radically different story and experience that I had. And so, we met as a group, and I just, after hearing this common plight about work, it seemed like work was the big thing that we were precluded from participating in. And so I just said, you know, I worked for a company that owned 120 companies. And so if I could introduce you to somebody that could hire you, like, what do you have to offer? And it was like I was speaking Mandarin. They just stared blankly back at me. And the only thing I understood at the time is that if you don't know your own value, nobody's going to figure it out for you. And these men had been so suffocated that they didn't know that they had value. And so we decided that we would work together to clean up our community, and that we would use that time to build resumes around things that take no education or experience to do. You can choose to show up on time every day. You can choose to work hard every day. You can choose to be a good teammate. You can choose to show up with a good attitude. You can choose to be dependable. And so we started measuring ourselves on that and holding ourselves accountable to that, with the idea that if we could demonstrate those skills, that we would then have value, that they understood they had value, and that we'd go use that to get jobs in the marketplace. And it failed miserably. But like most failures, failure is not a bad thing. Failure is a way to learn and to leapfrog forward. And so Bonton Farms is a story of a collective effort that led to failure after failure after failure, but we dusted ourselves off and we picked ourselves back up and we marched forward. That effort led to the birthing of what we call Bonton Honey Company. It was our first social enterprise. You see, we had this group where we would all get together and talk about the things that are working in our lives and the things that weren't working in our lives. And one day, this eclectic group of people met, and we had this honest conversation, and the guys were like, hey, Daron, no harm, no foul. This just didn't work. We're gonna have to go back and do what we did before. We're gonna have to go back to the streets. Some of the people that were from my part of town called me afterwards and said, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand what they're saying. And I was like, well, they're gonna have to go back and do their hustle, which is they're gonna have to sell dope or steal from people or prostitute, or these are kind of what the hustles we have. And everybody, the collective air went out of this conversation, and it was like, we can't let that happen. What can we do? And one of the guys there is like, well, I own a honey business, and I had a guy teach me how to do it. And so I'm willing to fund the startup of a honey business. I'll pay every penny it takes for the first 2 years, but I'll do none of the work. And at the end of 2 years, you'll either have something or you won't. That's up to you guys. The only thing I need to know is, will the guys work with bees? And so I'm like, we're always together. So I put my hand over the phone and I said, hey, guys, this is Nathan. He wants to know if, he wants to help us start a honey company. He wants to know if you guys will work with bees. And they're all like, hell no, we're not gonna work with bees. I was like, you've been shot 3 times. Like, I don't understand what the... So after a bit of a negotiation, we decided that bee stings weren't the worst thing we could face, and we decided that we would do it. And we launched our first social enterprise. And I will tell you that that was a catalytic moment that started what we now know as Bonton Farms, which is this eclectic mix of solutions that break down systemic barriers and set people free to live into the full potential that they've lived into. It started with economic development. I really thought that creating jobs in our community was the main or the primary answer. It's harder to do than you think. In Dallas, we're divided. We're a tale of 2 cities. And we have a north part of our town and a south part of our town. I didn't understand the degree of this until I went to one of our former mayor's speeches. And he talked about the fact that Dallas, north of I-30, 55% of our population lives, and south of I-30, 45% lives. I was surprised by that. It seems a lot more densely populated north than south, but we're almost 50-50. On the other hand, there's 95% of the job opportunities are north of I-30. So we have a city where half the population live where only 5% of the jobs are. And if you understand poverty at all, you know poverty impacts mobility. And so what tends to happen is we create this dynamic where the people that live where things are point to the people that live where things aren't and say they must not want to work because there's so many opportunities here, when we really just don't understand we can't get to those opportunities in the first place. And so more than just preparing people for jobs, it's really important that we create jobs, and that's easier said than done. But we set out to do that. We planted our first urban garden. It was a way that we could help grow food. So it turns out that a lot of people that wanted to participate in these economic opportunities happened to be sick. It's another thing that I was unfamiliar with. I've never been around so many people that were chronically sick. This wasn't sick like cold and flu like I was accustomed to. This was chronic illness, and so I didn't know. I had moved into Bonton by this point, and so I want to know, is this an environmental thing? Is this like Flint, Michigan, where the water's bad? You know, was this built like Shingle Mountain, where there's some kind of toxic thing around me that's causing so many people to be so sick? And as I asked those questions, they just said, no, this is a food desert. I'd never heard of a food desert. Like, what's a food desert? I don't understand. I live here, and the grocery store is only 3.5 miles away. What's the problem? And they're like, have you ever ridden the bus to go to the grocery store? I said, no. So my friends loaded me on a bus, and we rode to the grocery store, and I learned why it's a food desert. Unfortunately, Dallas County has 40 food deserts. It had 40 food deserts when I started, and it grieves me every night to go to bed knowing that there are still 40 food desert communities, but it's something that we're working on. So we planted a garden. It was a way to kind of start the conversation. It certainly wasn't the solution, but it was a way to take a step towards a solution. We have a liquor store and a beer and wine store across from where my house was and the garden was. Turns out our liquor store was selling dope out of it. A lady had bought dope, shot up, walked across the street in front of our garden, sat on a bus stop bench, and OD'd and died. And so the DEA and FBI and city come in and they close the liquor store down. There's crime tape around it. And a week later, one of my guys was walking in front of that very bus stop bench with a bag of vegetables. And somebody approached him and said, what do you have in the bag? My friend said, vegetables from our garden. Guy says, let me see. So he opened it up. He offered him $3 for it. And so my friend sold our bag of vegetables for $3. And a code enforcement officer that was across the street saw this happen and came across the street and wrote him a ticket for it. Again, it's another one of those no way things. Like, I get emotional thinking about. I can sit on my front porch and I can watch people sell people. You know, I can watch people sell a lot of other stuff, and we get written a ticket for selling vegetables. And it was just one of those watershed moments for me where it was like, this is enough. Like, this has got to stop. And so we went to City Hall to pick a fight. And I found a city that really was aware of the problem. They were passionate about solving the problem. They didn't know what to do. And so we were embraced. I got shuttled around to different people and met a host of different people within the city. We got to tell the story, and we walked away with almost a full city block of land to start an illegal garden on, to see if it was value adding or if it was filled with all the reasons why they made urban agriculture illegal or against an ordinance. And we had to agree to a cease and desist if it smelled or had traffic problems or all the other fears, unmeasured fears that they had, or if it produced value, they agreed to let us rewrite the ordinances to allow urban agriculture in the city. And that was 8 years ago. So we were able to show that urban agriculture has value. And what we started seeing as these men and women that had been incarcerated and addicted and homeless and trafficked and abused and homeless, as they started interacting with the land and the soil and the animals, they started healing. And I don't know that I fully understand that, other than I know that we have this disconnect in our urban centers from being connected to the environment around us, and that when we reconnect with it, it's cathartic and it's healing. And so all of these horrible traumas, I can remember conversation after conversation about how the people that had suffered so greatly could see their suffering and their redemption in the planting of a seed in the soil. And somehow the animals had this effect on them where they started seeing that they were needed every day. The animals needed them every day. And there's something about being at that low point in your life where you don't feel like you have any value. And on a farm, if you don't show up, everything dies. And so there's something about that dynamic that started helping people that had suffered greatly heal. And so we started doing more agriculture. Bonton Farms today is one of the largest urban farms in the United States. We have over 42 acres of agriculture under production inside the city limits of Dallas. We were successful in helping people starting to get jobs. The very first person we got employed came to my door 3 weeks in. This was a guy that looked like Ray Lewis. He was a very intimidating, big, strong man, very hard worker, tattooed from his ears down. And he had these alligator tears falling down his face when I went to the door, and I was like, man, what's going on? He's like, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. Man, I know I'm going to lose my job. And I'm like, why? Like, what's going wrong? And he's like, well, they're trying to repo my car. Like, you don't have a car. I drove you to your interview 3 weeks ago. You don't have a car. And he's like, well, I didn't think they would hire me. And on the application, they asked me if I had transportation to get there. So I knew if I said no, I didn't have a chance. So I said yes. And when they called me back, I was so surprised I had to go get a car so I could get to work. And I was like, but that hadn't even been a month ago. How can they be trying to repo your car? And he's like, oh, I pay weekly. I never heard of weekly car payments. So I was like, bring me your paperwork. He brought me his paperwork. He paid $8,400 for a car that had a blue book value of $3,200. And they charged him weekly. Well, you don't get paid until the pay cycle comes. So from the first week, he was already in default, and they were trying to repo his car. And so we started a car company. Each of these mountains that we encountered, it was just like we responded by creating something good that would replace the oppressive thing that existed that held us down. It's like building a house a room at a time without a plan. Until one day, that big city block that the city had given us to start the first Bonton Farms on, we grew food for a season, and I'm not a real farmer, so I have to look up on YouTube, like, what do real farmers do after they've grown food? Because intuitively I know that it takes things from the soil to grow, and if you don't replace them, you're going to wind up bankrupt. And so how do you replace that stuff? Well, most farmers let their land rest or sit fallow. We didn't have any extra land to let rest, so what do? Well, you have to supplement it with this hyper-rich, nutrient-dense compost, right? So it's fresh organic matter that's decomposed, and it's just filled with all these nutrients. And if you add that back into the soil, then you can keep producing on the same land. And so I ordered 2 tractor trailer loads of compost, and it rained for 3 days, starting the day they delivered it. And so when it finally stopped, we were going to have to do this really hard job of taking this smelly and now really heavy compost. We had no tools at the time, so 1 shovel load at a time into the garden, putting it into the rows. And I didn't want our team doing that without knowing why. So I gathered everybody around and I handed out these packets of seeds. And I said, look, all that food we grew all year, it didn't come without a cost. It took things to grow it. And if we don't put it back, we're not going to keep getting food. We're going to wind up bankrupt. So we're going to do this really hard job, a shovel load at a time. We're going to put this compost in the garden. And when you're done, you're going to take those seeds that you have in your hand and you're going to plant them in that restored soil. And before long, those seeds will look like the picture on the packet you took it out of. And one of the guys looked back at me and he said, man, these seeds are dead. Why would you say that? I just bought those seeds. They're brand new. Why would you say that about these seeds? And he's like, well, they're shriveled up and dry. That's what dead things look like. And it's true, but I had never thought of that before. And so I was like, look, if you take these seeds and if you put them in that restored soil and you position it the way we have this garden where the sun passes overhead, and if you give it the right amount of water, that seed is almost assuredly become what it was created to be. And one of the ladies starts crying, and I'm a dude, so I don't understand I'm missing something here. I know I've said something stupid. I just don't know what it was. And so I just said, what did I do? She said, it's not you. It's okay. I'm like, no, I need to understand what's happening. And she said, it's just that we're just like those seeds. I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. And she said, I grew up here. We grew up here. What was our sun, soil, and water? What did we have to build our life with? And it's the first time that I stopped to try to understand the humanity of who we are as a people, and how do we see that everybody has the resources, the tools that we all had to build a life with. And it brought me to this understanding, and I had to go back and learn. I know the history of slavery, and I know it's been a long time ago, and I know from that time we had emancipation, and from emancipation we had segregation, and then I know we had civil rights. And so what's going on here? And it turns out that during segregation, as black families started to prosper, that was challenged too. The most notable story is what you hear in Tulsa at Black Wall Street. But that happened all over the country, and it happened in Dallas. It happened in Bonton. In fact, before Bonton was Bonton, it was referenced as Bombtown. Because as black families started to prosper and buy land or houses closer to the white communities, they bombed them. And so the answer to that was to build public housing to keep them where they belong. And I know I'm using challenging language, but I think it's really important that we face the brutal reality of what happened, not so that we can be victims or stay there, but so we can learn from it to move forward. But this is how inner city communities were formed. And so Bonton, it was in a floodplain. We're on the banks of a Trinity River because during emancipation, black families always think about this. What would it be like to be told you're free, but that you can't go anywhere where there's other people or institutions or things that are already established? I have to go where there's nothing. And so a lot of our freedmen's communities were established on the banks of the Trinity River because it's a floodplain and nobody else would build there. And so what was it like to start from scratch in a floodplain? And then in the mid-50s, for your city to build public housing in a floodplain that they knew would flood every year, and then build floodgates to keep the waters in your community so it wouldn't flood the rest of the city, and that they intentionally put you in this place to keep you separate. And I always thought the greatest crime was to keep us separate from each other. But what I've learned in Bonton is they thrived being separate from each other. What didn't happen is we were separated from the tools and resources that everybody else had to build their life with. And in 2022, in the richest country in the history of the world, and in one of the richest cities in the richest country in the history of the world, we have 75 communities that were created under this same system that still don't have the basic resources, the sun, soil, and water that people need to build lives with. Our schools aren't equitably equipped to prepare our kids to compete in a free market economy. When we graduate, we haven't graduated in Bonton over 54% of our kids from high school in 40 years. And it's not because we're not capable. It's because of the stress of poverty, so the children are forced to try to go out and work so that we don't get evicted and we keep our roof over our head. And it's because even if I graduate, I'm not equipped to be able to go compete with jobs. And so if I'm going to wind up working minimum wage jobs, but even after I graduate, why graduate? And so education is a foundational framework of one of the inequities that exists. As I mentioned earlier, the jobs, we have 5% of the jobs where 45% of the population lives, so we don't have the economy in our community. We're separated, and so transportation becomes a barrier. We don't have health care services in our inner cities. So if we get a cold and you need to be seen, the best way to do that in the inner city is call an ambulance, because to go to the ER is the best way to ensure that you're going to be seen in a reasonable amount of time. We're food desert communities, so we don't have access to fresh, affordable food. And then assuming somehow we navigate that and we get employed and we're fighting our tail off to make ends meet, if you have a financial hardship or if you have some kind of financial barrier where you need to build a bridge, the only financial tools we have are predatory. So we don't have mainstream banks that work for us. And so if you take all of those obstacles and you layer them on top of one another, that is why we say Bonton and communities like it are communities that are fighting against the odds. What does that look like in Bonton? Well, there's 3,800 zip codes in the state of Texas. Out of the 3,800 zip codes, we incarcerate the highest percentage of people in the state. We have the second highest teen birth rate, highest infant mortality rate. We graduate under 54% of our kids from high school every year, and we suffer from more than double the rate of cancer and stroke and heart disease and diabetes and childhood obesity than the county we're in. In fact, in Bonton, men will live 11.7 years less than the average lifespan of the average man in Dallas County. And that sounds tragic, but what I hear in that is good news. And the reason I hear good news is because we can do something about it. We know what works because we all had the ability and the privilege of using equipment and tools that our society has built for us to leverage a life for us to live to our full potential. Whether we do that or not is up to us because we have the equipment and the tools that we needed. In our inner cities, it's simply a recognition that we've deprived those communities from those tools. And the big bet of Bonton Farms is that when all those tools are present, that our community will use them and those outcomes will normalize. And we think that can happen in the near term. And so this is a conversation about sustainability. And part of the sustainability is about poverty. It's part of the sustainability is about the environment. Part of the sustainability is about the economics. And part of the sustainability is about seeing that it's equitable and everybody live into their full potential. And so we call those, in Bonton Farms language, human essentials. We call them human essentials because I want when people hear that to know that we're not asking for anything extra, right? They're human essentials. It's like sun, soil, and water to people. These are not things that in our modern society that you can succeed with without having them. In fact, for 6 years now, I've been telling the story of the inequities around predatory lending and the fact that we don't have fair lending in our communities. And I ask this question wherever I get to go around the world and tell this story. Could you be and do what you've been and done if you never had access to credit? And I've yet to have a single person in 6 years, I've traveled all over the world telling this story. With just that one barrier, not one person has been able to say, I could have done it without that. In fact, when I graduated college as a former athlete, I hadn't worked. I went to college before they started giving college kids credit cards before you had credit. And so I got my first job. I'm all excited. Well, I had to move. You don't get a reload package when you're newly graduated from college and you have no work experience yet. I had to rent a U-Haul trailer. What do you need to rent a U-Haul trailer? Credit card. I had to put a deposit down on an apartment. What do you need to do that? I had no income yet. I had to put first and last month payment down for my utilities. How do you do that? I had to borrow $5,000 to take my first job. I couldn't have done that if I didn't have access to credit. And I think if we were all honest, that one barrier alone would be enough to hold the rest of us back. And so I think that you can start to see that these tools are absolutely essential. And so we call them human essentials. And for us, it's economic development. We have to create economic opportunities in our communities, not just to participate in those that have been created in other communities. The reason why, they say that the dollar stays in an inner city community an average of 6 minutes. If money can't circulate in our neighborhood because all the goods and services and work is outside, then as soon as we earn a dollar, we have to spend it and give it back to you for the goods and services we need, and the money doesn't stay there, and therefore we can't build wealth. So we have to build an economic foundation in our inner cities. We can't build it fast enough, so we have to build a transportation system to get us to those systems and structures that already exist, and that's absolutely paramount. If you think about the third component of it is really about community building, and this is a fascinating thing to think about. But if you talk to the old timers in our community that lived in Bonton before the projects were built in the early 50s, they'll tell you that Bonton has always been materially poor, but it was rich in community. I have amazing stories about families that had hardships, and other families took their children in as their own because they had to for those children to have a decent upbringing. I have stories about a good friend of mine that there was only one car for 3 blocks, and his whole life was spent collecting a grocery list from those 3 blocks, and all weekend was spent seeing that they shuttled groceries back and forth to those families. That's a richness in community. Well, when public housing was built with no resources, and you congregate a bunch of poor people together with no resources, all of a sudden everybody's a competitor. We started fighting over crumbs, and it turned into a place where you can lose your life by walking down the wrong street with the wrong color on. But that's a man-made construct. See, we get blamed for it, but it's not our fault. We got put in a place where we had to fight to survive, and we get what we paid for. So by creating community, people come to Bonton Farms all the time and say, we got voted one of the best patios in Dallas at our restaurant. And we take pride in that, but what we really take pride in is when people come out and congregate on the patio, and when they come to the coffee house to have a cup of coffee, and when they go to the restaurant to break bread together, all of a sudden that community starts to heal again. Instead of viewing each other as competitors, we now become a community that need each other because we each bring something to the table. We each have something to offer. And when we treat ourselves separately, that equation doesn't work out. That equation doesn't equal what we can. And so Bonton's become one of the safest communities on all of Dallas because we're starting to see the value we have of creating intentional spaces where people break bread together and they congregate and socialize together. And we're reverting back to that culture where we're maybe not rich in material possessions yet, but we are becoming rich in community again. The other one we talked about, human essential, is health and wellness. So part of it is access to health care, and part of it is access to fresh, affordable food. And so it's the combination of those two things that will start to change those horrible health outcomes that we talked about earlier. It's about education, and education isn't just what we talked about with children. While that is the prevailing part of it, it's that we have adults that never grew up with the same kind of wisdom and life experience that we got to grow up. I tell people all the time, when it comes to preparing people to be successful at maximizing their income through work, is we talk about value creation. You get compensated by the value you create, not how long you've been there, not whether you've been there longer than this person or what your job title is. You get compensated truth be told, by the value you create. My grandfather used to always tell me, son, if you'll do more than what you get paid for, before long you'll get paid more for what you do. I've been told that before I knew what it meant. And so it's this transference of wisdom back into our communities that we've been deprived of. And so that's a big part of it. It's breaking down the barriers of predatory lending. I'm really excited to say that we've partnered with 9 banks to bring the first inner city bank of its kind in the United States, where all 9 banks, we got them to agree not to treat us as a charity, but to view us as an emerging market. And it's like, if you viewed us as a future customer, what kind of financial tools would you provide? And all of them said, I don't know. And I said, if you'll not talk and you'll listen, our community will tell you. So we started having community listening sessions. And it turns out there's about 15 remedial products that this bank will offer, so that we have a stepping stone to leverage those remedial products to become mainstream banking customer. And that will come live in 2023. So, and then I think the last thing I want to touch on with the human essentials is safe, affordable housing. Average wages prior to COVID in South Dallas were about $11.60 an hour, and base rent for a studio apartment's $900 a month. And so you have people working full time and not even be able to afford a roof over their head, at least not a safe roof over their head. And why do that if I can't live a decent life? And so people opt out of the mainstream system. I heard the other day that we have over 6 million people, 20% of the capable workforce, that have opted out. And so it's what happens when working doesn't pay dividends, where it doesn't pay me to work. And so how do we create this ecosystem where available wages align with affordable housing? And so we're building a tiny home village, a pallet shelter village, some really innovative individual home structures, and then a 34-unit workforce housing apartment complex that will allow people to live there regardless of what they make. They'll pay no more than 30% of their gross income. And so that's what we call 7 human essentials. And I think if there's any greater thing that in the United States that we can do to turn the tide of this divisive, kind of ever-devolving fabric of our country, it's to see that what General Mattis, I heard speak the other day. I got to be at a presentation where he spoke and talked about the greatness of this country, which I affirm, but we were born with a birth defect. And it's what you do about that. And I think it's time that we reconcile with our past, that we admit what happened, and then we work with our communities to see that everybody has an equitable opportunity to see that they have the ability for the full potential that was created them to come to life. And if there's anything that happens at Bonton Farms that's worth telling, it's the story of the lives that are being transformed, not because of anything we did, but because we're simply walking alongside, understanding their life story, and then providing the equipment and equipping them to use the tools that they've been deprived of to build these lives. And it's one of just the most fascinating things I've ever seen in my life. I just want to thank you for your patience and time of letting me trying to condense a 30-year story or journey into 35 minutes for you today. I hope that you'll want to learn more about Bonton Farms. To do so, you can go to our website at bontonfarms.org. Also, just by Googling Bonton, one of the things that I'm really proud of is that when I moved into the community 11 years ago, the city actually tried to change the name of our community to Rochester Park. It turns out that if you go to prison with Bonton or one of the gang signs tattooed on your arm, because we incarcerate the highest percentage of people in the state of Texas, you're automatically made inside the prison system. And so Bonton didn't have a good connotation to it. So the city tried to change our name to Rochester Park. What a silly idea, right? I mean, I was a bad kid growing up, and if my parents thought they could change my name and call me Fred and I'd somehow start behaving, that's just ludicrous to think about. But that's the way the city approached Bonton. But if you Google Bonton today, there will come up a host of stories of beauty and redemption and overcoming and opportunity and hope. And so you can learn an awful lot more of our journey just by Googling Bonton Dallas and seeing the stories that come up. And no longer stories of murders and crime and bombings, but stories of hope and redemption. And so that's a great way to do it. And I just thank you all for your time, and I hope we'll see you down in Bonton soon for a visit.
Thank you so much. What a thought-provoking presentation. We're now going to move into kind of an interview, and hopefully you can answer some of our burning questions.
I'll do my best.
Thank you. What makes urban agriculture uniquely suited to growing and building our communities?
I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think that innately we long to be connected to the environment. And as we've migrated more and more to urban centers, we have this void that exists that manifests in a lot of ways, a lot of depression. I think a lot of our medication comes from we're just disconnected, and we're made to be connected to the environment around us. And I think urban agriculture connects us back to the soil and to plants and to the sun and to environments. And I think that it has a cathartic effect that's beyond explanation for everybody. I've witnessed that at Bonton Farms all the time, more profoundly with people that have suffered. And I think there's something about urban agriculture needs you every day. And I think if you've suffered and you've been and felt unneeded or unworthy, that every day you show up to the farm and you take care of those animals, they're excited to see you because you take care of them. If you plant a seed, it needs you to show up the next day to care for it or it dies. And I think there's something in that being needed that starts to help people heal. But I will also tell you that people that come down that think they have it all together and they're coming down to buy lunch to help the poor people or, whatever that motivation is, and I'll watch them break down in tears when they walk through the garden and they don't know why. And I think it's this innate desire and need to be connected to the world around us, to the raw environment around us. And I think lastly, because of that, there's this amazing reconnection to community in a time where I think we feel more divided than ever. You can walk through a garden with people that are absolutely different than you in every possible way imaginable, and we recognize that we're not different in every possible way imaginable. We're human beings, and we have way more in common, and the differences should be celebrated and not divisive. And there's something powerful about a garden that does that too. And I could go on, but I don't want to start rambling about that.
Thank you.
It's an incredibly powerful tool.
Yes, agreed. It is obvious that you consider yourself a part of the community. How would you say, was the community welcoming to you when you first started?
No. That's a really strange question because I am part of the community, and the people that call Bonton home are as much my family as my blood family. And so we say we all the time, and it's this strange response like, you're not black, right? You're not from Bonton, right? And I do know that, but it is a we thing, and it's not honest to say they and them and us. It's like we are one. But I also recognize, and I think it's important to point out, that I am not from the community, and I never will be. And my best advocates will say, you are one of us, but I will never be. And I think it's important just to acknowledge that we have a place together, but we can't claim to be from the same place and have the same experiences. I only have been privileged to experience things vicariously through people, but it's not the same as a lived experience for me. And so there is a delineation there that I think is important. And that's why I think it's strange, because yes, I am that community and I am from that community, and it is we. And at the same time, I have this profound recognition that I'm different, and that's not my home, and that I'll never really will be that. And so it's a strange dichotomy. When I first came to Bonton, I had a meeting when I felt like I was supposed to move there, that was a catalytic thing, that one, to honor what I was supposed to do with my life, but also to be present enough to actually help. I asked 6 of my closest friends to meet me at the park, and I pitched this idea to them, and they just laughed at me and said, no way, you won't make it here. There's just no way. And we had a really interesting thing where we finally came into agreement, was just that if something catalytic like that doesn't happen, what changes here? Like, something has to spark the fire, and maybe that would be it. And I feel like I'm supposed to do it. So to be honest to myself, I need to. And they agreed. I don't think they fully all supported it, but they agreed to fight for me. And fight they did, like literally. It was very contentious. and very disruptive. And I had to recognize that I look like all of the trauma that they've experienced, and I had to be really careful to earn trust and not to expect it, and to earn relationship and not to expect it. And that every day I had to be of the highest integrity of be who I say I am, do what I say I'm going to do. And while there were 6 guys that agreed to protect me and let me come there, that grew to 10 and to 20 and to 30. And now there's probably about a third of the community that would die for me and me for them. And there's probably another third of the community that doesn't really care yet. And there's probably another third that was just that we'd go away. And so every day it's trying to earn more of that, but it's always contentious, and those are battles we just have to be willing to fight.
What can we do to address food deserts in Dallas?
End them. End them. You know, I think, again, I mentioned this in the talk, we live in the richest country in the history of the world. In Dallas, we import 40% more food than we can consume. And to say that we don't have the capacity to innovate a solution to that is disingenuous, and I think it's an excuse. And I wish that we would just end excuses and say food insecurity is not acceptable in a country like ours, and that there's innovation out there that would allow us to solve this once and for all. To be more specific, there have been some changes in the economy and how things work, specifically in retail and the way food works. I think you know that Kroger announced a $500 million food distribution plant in southern Dallas, and it's designed to help get food to people at their home instead of shopping in a grocery store. And that is a paradigm shift that's not going away. As much as you may like shopping in a grocery store, as much as I'm like reading a book in a newspaper with the touch and feel of the paper in my hands, it's going away. And so the exciting news is that creates an opportunity where it may not make economic sense to build a $50 million grocery store in every food desert community. We can now take this paradigm shift and leverage it to see that food gets into our households without having that physical store present. Because of COVID, we had another huge paradigm shift where food entitlement benefits, which are really necessary for our more neglected neighborhoods, that the technological pathway has been created to pay for groceries online with food entitlement benefits. And then the third is to address the technology void that has been had, but I believe that that's already underway as well. So to me, that's a 3-legged stool. And I think that if we could get, I'm going to call them out by name, AT&T and Kroger and other food retailers to the table to say we want to end it, that we could end it with those paradigm shifts.
So you've got 30 years of experience under your belt now. What mistakes have you made, and what would you change?
I would have been more disruptive and independent early on instead of just following the status quo. You know, I think we're pack animals, and I think that we like to follow the herd. And I would have loved to become more independent earlier on. I think in me and in most of us, our lives want to matter, and they want to count to leave a legacy that leaves the world in a better place than we found it. And yet we're kind of told that we should go to school, get this education, and go make money and build houses and bigger houses and more cars and more stuff and retire. And in doing so, we can die an inch deep and a mile wide. And I've seen people work their whole life for a little bit of savings and have the stock market crash at the wrong time and lose a life's work and never get to live that out. And I would argue that what Bonton's taught me is that the things that I have in relationships and transformation in Bonton can't be taken away by any war or economy or anything else. That these things will last the test of time, and that those things are more worthy of pursuing than the other. And I think when you pursue things that change the world and you're deeply passionate about it, then you can earn a living doing it too, versus putting earning a living first. I think that, certainly as it relates to Bonton Farms, I would have been more intentional about documenting the lessons along the way. You know, we're 11 years into it. And because I never intended to start Bonton Farms, I just wanted to help my friends that I met that didn't have the opportunity that I had. And when that became apparent, what I tell people all the time is sometimes you see things you can't unsee. I couldn't walk away from that. And so my motivation was just to be present for them so that they had the same opportunity that I had. And in doing so, I learned the problems were more systemic and more broad, and there were more barriers. And so Bonton Farms is a result of that. I would have been way more intentional to document all of the lessons I've learned, because as we were talking about with Neil in urban agriculture earlier, that intellectual capital kept inside one's brain puts at risk great work. You know, our average age of our farmers is close to 70 now. And as they die off and the younger generations aren't equipped, then we lose that knowledge. And I would have been way more diligent of documenting all the lessons so that it's not contained just up in my head, but that it's documented out for others to share. And then I think the last thing is that I wish that earlier on I would have not watched so much news that tells us the story of how divided and different we are. And in watching the stories unfold, you only see the surface level. Like you only hear somebody got shot in the inner city again, and you don't ever understand the struggle or the story why. And so we start to point fingers at one another, and we start to think of each other as different. It's why I'm so resolute in saying we, even though I recognize that I'm not exactly the same. I think it's so important that we recognize our humanity in one another. And I think one of the things that I'm convicted of as it relates to that is, as an athlete, the further you progress in your athletic career, the more I became a minority. And because athletics is this great equalizer, we never viewed ourselves as different by race. We were a team, and we always had that amazing foundation. But as it turns out, most of my teammates, or a good portion of my teammates that were African American, wound up going to prison, and none of my white teammates did. And I never stopped to understand why until I got introduced to Bonton, and I never stopped to learn what they had to do to get to the place I was, right? And so I think the last thing, and I'm kind of long-winded about saying it, is understanding the struggles of your neighbors that may not look like you, but are absolutely human like you. And that when we understand that and we meet each other where they are, a rising tide raises all ships. And I think that's a really powerful idea that I missed out on for a good portion of my life.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today and sharing your story. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.